ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Serving Nerve, the show where we talk about the restaurant industry, tipping, blah, 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 all kinds of stuff. Being a server in a restaurant, basically. Today we're going to be going through r/EndTipping. Now, listen, I'm very biased, alright? My job is literally made of tips. I get paid $2.13 an hour, never see that money. My tips are my wage. And I've talked extensively on this channel pertaining to how tipping works, what you have to pay out as a server to other members of staff at the restaurant. So in general, you need those tips to basically live. But r/EndTipping is the exact opposite. It's basically like advocating for a system where U.S. workers aren't reliant on tips, e.g. 20% rolled into menu price, things like that. But I've seen some people have very reasonable perspectives on here pertaining to stopping tipping because certain, industries don't need tips to survive. They get paid a wage. But there are also other individuals on here that are kind of ridiculous and obviously just don't want to tip even when there's a service performed that should be tipped, especially if it makes up an individual's wage. So I know I'm biased. A lot of people on here are biased, but we're going to kind of go through it, see what we can kind of garner from it. Maybe we'll learn a little something. Maybe we'll hate ourselves more. We never know. So far we're going through, there's a list of, tip-free restaurants. Some of these restaurants have auto gratuity involved. Other ones are just low-end kind of places or, lower-end individual places like, Shake Shack, places like that aren't like restaurants. So there's going to be information like that. I did already open this document and I was just kind of scanting through. And in general, it's interesting. It just kind of, shows you what is rolled into menu prices, what's auto-grat, what's, not, what doesn't have a tip jar, what place has a tip jar, etc. How much to tip? This is kind of weird, not gonna lie. Home deliveries, Amazon drivers, $5 to $20 in cash in an envelope if the delivery is extra large. I don't believe in that. I'm not gonna lie. Amazon people, half the time, the people who drop off my Amazon packages don't even leave them at my door. And also, they're paid a base wage. I get that. Salons and spas, I've never been to a salon or a spa, so honestly, I get that I don't have a good perspective on things like that. But again, for me, if a service is performed appropriately and a really good job is done, I have very little issue tipping if somebody is, really, really good with what they're doing. I think it promotes people to do better at their jobs. But that's the thing. We need to also know that tipping is not obligatory. You shouldn't be obligated to tip anything to anyone, ever. Even in restaurants, as much as it would ruin my own wage, I do have to be honest, the 20% tipping rule, it necessitates our, livelihood as servers, but if you don't do it, you can't be penalized for it. It's not like something that you should be forced to do. You should have the decision to make when it comes to tipping. And servers should actually be working hard for their tips. There are a lot of places I've been to, a lot of places I've worked, and a lot of places I've dined at throughout my life where the servers are terrible. They're so bad, but they still get tips 20%. And I personally don't agree with that. I think that the services should be performed appropriately. Now, this is when we get into nitpicking, and then people start taking away tips from servers, even when they feel like they're not doing a good job, when the restaurant is slammed, when the server's trying to do everything they possibly can to make sure every table is happy, etc. So it's, it's a balancing act, but I would say things like the food and drink tipping section here. Restaurant dine-in, 15 to 20% of total check. Makes sense. I've gone into the math about this before, and I personally think you should look at the video. I will link it in the description or in another section of this video talking about why the 20% tip rule exists. It's actually my first video on my channel outside of my intro video. But restaurants for takeout, 10 to 15% of total check. I don't really believe in that always. I would say, no. I don't know. I've never actually done a lot of eating out from restaurants in terms of takeout. If I go to a restaurant and I get my server to get me something to go, then I still tip on the total bill 20%. But in terms of restaurant takeout, nobody ever tips 20% on a restaurant takeout thing unless it's super out there. Bartenders, $2 per drink or 10 to 15% of the bill. I've worked with bartenders. I say that if you're at a restaurant as a bartender and you're working as a restaurant bartender, you should be tipped 20%. If you're working at other establishments that maybe are super, super low end, the income is just less consistent and the total bill is super low, 20% of that bill is a couple dollars. Or if you want to tip a couple dollars per drink, that isn't unreasonable. But again, like if you're going out and you're going to ball out on drinks and stuff anyways, you should be balling out enough to be able to tip your server. This is the other thing. A lot of these options, a lot of these antics are voluntary. You can choose to, one, not tip and then not complain about it if you don't want to tip. But two, you can just choose to not go to these places that have things like auto gratuity, additional tipping, or requests for tipping, or where you know you're going to have to tip. Like, that's the thing I take issue with this whole, like, Reddit thing. It's people just unnecessarily complaining about how much they have to tip when they don't always need the service that they're tipping for. Or they don't have to tip and they can just shut up about it. But that's my personal opinion. I'm on the exact opposite side of the spectrum when it comes to this. I'm always for tipping over not tipping, depending on the circumstance. But I've always been like a giver. I always do this kind of stuff. And when I feel like, you know, when I don't have the money to tip, I've done other things for people. Like, a good example is, and I'm not trying to, you know, promote anything and feed my own ego, because I think this is just a good thing to do. I had some dude fix my car for me. I was told this car was going to be like $1,300 to fix, and he literally did it all by the book. I needed to get it safety inspected. All that was needed was O2 sensors in there. He didn't lie to me. He didn't baloney with me. And at the end of the day, he only charged me $350, even though one of those sensors was seized into the machine, like into the engine or whatever it is. I'm sorry, I'm not very good with cars, as you can tell when somebody's trying to charge me $1,300 to fix part of my car that won't even fix the entire problem. But the point I'm trying to make, dude charged me $350, told me to charge these parts to my own Amazon account for like $90 for like 402 sensors with tax included and everything, send them to his house, and he was holding my car for me for over 2 weeks, figuring out how to do this stuff, and he didn't give me any trouble. Sure, it was a delayed experience, but it was, one, kind of nice of him to help me. Two, he made time for me when he was swamped with a bunch of orders. And three, he also didn't charge me an arm and a leg and let me store my car with him instead of having to drive it to and from the facility I was trying to store it at previously. So, you know, I personally decided, hey, I already threw this guy $350. I don't have a lot of money for wiggle room. I'll bake him some brownies. What I do, bring some brownies for him and his friends. I also ate some extra ones because that's just how we operate. But you don't have to always, like, if it's someone who does a good service, you know, sometimes it's not even necessary to give them money. To pay them fairly, to treat them fairly, and also, every now and then, drop a bonus if they do a great job. I personally believe in that. I don't think you need to tip for everything. I don't think you need to give something to everyone outside of the service they're already being paid to perform. But if you find that somebody does something good outside of whatever industry they're in, something that benefits you greatly and saves you so much, a tip of any kind, whether it's an item, a financial means, money, whatever, I personally don't see anything wrong with that. But the argument here on r/tipping, or EndTipping, sorry, is mainly that it's insane and it's become excessive in so many capacities. I mean, you've had time to look over some of this board, so sorry. And yeah, like baristas, $1 per drink or more if your order is complicated. And this is kind of subjective. Like, what is a barista? It's gonna be someone who makes your coffee. You going to a local diner? You going to a Starbucks? Like, the wages are different for all of these places. So on a corporate level, like if I'm going to Starbucks or something and I'm getting charged an arm and a leg for a drink, I'm not going to be particularly inclined for some girl who can make my drink in like 2 minutes and makes it with all these other people's drinks and ends up, just kind of giving me my stuff, and I pay like $10 for it or whatever the case may be. I'm not going to feel obligated to tip, especially when these people also get a base wage. Now, I'm not saying the base wage is good. I'm just saying that versus a server who's performing like wine service or something for a table and ordering steaks and according themselves with allergies and all kinds of stuff and performing complicated tasks and orienting themselves in a workplace in order to get that money and get that 20% tip. There's a big difference there in my personal opinion. 50% gratuity for parties over one. Okay, Save America, blah, 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 all this dumb stuff. $10,000 a plate. So this is for the uber rich, the crazy, the insane. But here's something I'm going to point out. The point of auto gratuity after a certain party size is actually pretty beneficial in certain circumstances. Now, at low-end places, I haven't even seen this exist, but if you're at a high-end place, you as a server are usually given a bigger party sometimes, and that party is going to take up your whole night. It's overly demanding, and if you have a party of, like, say, 8 or greater, which is usually the float that I've seen auto gratuity placed on, it's like 8+ people, you need that money, because if all of those people decide not to tip or they want to split the bill up crazy and then they don't tip on it, you literally get screwed over for your entire day's wage because you're usually going to be forced to operate that party almost exclusively. Like, that's why the whole, like, auto gratuity after a certain number of people comes in. But anything over 1 is ridiculous. I would say anything over 6 or more, I'd probably try to impose. In fact, one day, I will have some sort of establishment. Cafe, restaurant, diner, I don't care. But either way, I'm going to figure out how to get around their problems and my problems as a server. But 50% is pretty ridiculous, especially when it's $10,000 a plate. Man, I wish I were working here making good money like that. God dang. Tip on a hotel booking site. That's an atrocity. I don't like that. So do they do anything? Or is it just the machine I'm booking my stuff on? Why would I tip? Who's there? Like, this is the problem. It's like, tipping culture has gotten insane. Like, there's no logic behind half of the tipping nowadays. And the other half, people complain because they're getting undertipped because everybody else sees all this other stuff and is like, dude, the tipping's crazy. I don't want to tip. So that's not good. Being pressured to tip average service / 2 examples of guilt tipping. So basically, I met with a group of friends at a restaurant, but because I was running late, I could only join for the later half of the fellowship. Long story short, when it came time to pay, I discreetly decided to pay the lowest tip percentage because I thought the service was average and money was tight at the time, and figured 10% was better than not tipping at all. For the record, I am more than willing to reward great service or, depending on the circumstances, if the person is struggling to make ends meet. Okay, the ending part's weird there, but I get the point. Several others in the group began to have a sort of pissing match of who could leave the bigger tip to. I was one of the few who didn't partake in the contest, as I silently left my own tip without announcing it as we all went Dutch. Okay. I have to point this out. That sounds absolutely fantastic. I want a tipping war. I've never gotten one of those. I'm lucky if I get 20%. I cry every time I get 20% out of joy because I usually don't. But the point I'm trying to make is I wish somebody were to whip it out and measure, but in a financial means. That sounds like an absolute pleasantry. But in general, you know, if you come in and you are designated for a certain time coming into a restaurant and things like that, and you and your party of people are all there dining, then a 20% tip is kind of expected. Now, if you pop in near the end, say they're hitting entrees and you last minute order something, that does throw server flow way out of whack if you come late, which is why a lot of places don't want to seat incomplete parties in general. Now, let's say it's just you. You're running really late, your people are already rocking it, and you don't know the establishment. Maybe it's a low-end establishment, service is average, whatever. I personally still would tip, or I wouldn't be late. This is the kind of thing where it's like, I don't like this whole thing where it's like, well, I came in at this time, so technically I'm only going to tip this much. And again, you don't know the circumstances because you don't know what this person ate, you don't know what this person drank, you don't know what they asked for, you don't know the services they required, you don't know if they had allergies, you don't know any of this stuff. But as a server on average, like, let's say this is like, you know, what happens to you. I personally think it should be one card, it should be, you know, the whole party pays out, they can all Zelle each other, whatever, and they tip 20% on the total bill. And, you know, maybe that's crazy, but that's my personal opinion. I hate group orders that are like, here's 14 cards. I've done 14 card splits before. It's a nightmare. It sucks. Certain machines are not built for it. Depending on the POS system that you're rocking, it's a nightmare. You have to calculate everything individually. You've got to swipe all these cards. You got to find the checkbooks to do all of this. So, personally, I would be very inclined as a party goer to tip 20%. Now, saying that, I also have an instance where I didn't tip at all. I don't like to not tip. It really takes a lot for me to not tip. But I went to this sushi place with a group of about 8 people. And I go there, and the service was the worst service I've had in my entire life. I remember specifically, all of our drinks came stagnated when we did one drink order. All of our food came stagnated. Our server disappeared for over an hour. Like, and it wasn't that busy. She just gallivanted off, and we were like, we had to go to the host stand where the seating was being placed, and we're like, where's our server? Like, we've been waiting forever. And the food was mid. I paid for the food. It's not the server's fault that the food was mid. But at the end of the day, in general, that is the one instance where I'm pretty sure I just left a $0 tip. I was like, I'm not paying for this person. It was like $60, so it would have been like nothing on their tip out or whatever, and it wasn't that high end of a place. They're not tipping out, you know, 80% tip out or anything crazy. But that's when service is so bad and you feel like the service is genuinely absolutely atrocious and the server's literally just not there to serve you, then there's no point in tipping them. In my personal opinion, there are times where it's just like, I'm not gonna tip. Now, again, like if I go to a restaurant and they even just try, like I'm willing to tip. Like it doesn't take that much. But there are instances where if it's that bad, then tipping, honestly, tipping is supposed to be that you feel the service is appropriate. If there's a certain point that the service is bad, then what's the point of tipping? Now, again, given that everybody's wages are made from tipping, you should try harder or you're going to lose your money and you're going to lose your job. Anyways, this guy just goes on about getting guilt tripped. I think I have read this particular story before, but it's just about, guilt tripping. And personally, I don't think you should be guilt tripped into tipping anything. I think you should just tip feeling like the service is appropriate. Our auto gratuity policy. For your convenience, a 20% auto gratuity will be added to all guest checks. These tips are paid directly to our hardworking staff. Yes, you are able to leave more. Please feel free to leave additional tips to show your support and love on the additional tip line and on all credit card vouchers, whatever. Personally, again, like if you don't like a place for doing auto gratuity, don't go. It's not that complicated. There's a point where obviously larger parties are going to do auto gratuity no matter what the place is at certain circumstances, at certain establishments. But in general, like if you find there's like auto gratuity and you don't like the auto gratuity, don't tip. I mean, if there's auto gratuity though, I'm not tipping additionally. Like I don't like that. But the other thing is auto gratuity is kind of important because there are a lot of people who will just tip $5 on a 500, and that kind of screws over the server. Like at the end of the day, it's auto gratuity. Like the reason auto gratuity exists at a lot of places is because the tipping has been really bad. So it kind of was a self-imposed problem, in my personal opinion. Tipping a few percent on top of an already like 20% auto gratuity. That's something. I don't really believe in this. I think that they should like either do auto gratuity, but they shouldn't expect, like, I don't know. I feel like you shouldn't expect more if you're doing auto gratuity. Pardon the tapping. If tipping were abolished today, what do you think the hourly wage would be for a server at your favorite restaurant? 0. Half of us would get fired. What do you mean? They overstaff servers in restaurants so much so on that $2.13 an hour that if they actually had to start paying a base wage, they would just cull us. Like they would completely like skim the surface, leave the main ones in there, and then get rid of the rest. And then the wage would be terrible too. It'd probably be like, depending on the establishment, $13 to $20 an hour maximum. And that's like the higher end of that, it's livable. But honestly, like the thing about being a server, I don't know if I've explained this, but the thing about being a server is you make all of your money in a certain allotment of time, but you're there for a longer amount of time. You're gonna maybe you come in early, maybe you open an hour and a half, whatever. You close up hour and a half. 3 hours, you're not getting paid anything. That amount of money that you make during dining hours, like say 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock, that 4 hours is supposed to compensate for the other like 3 hours of labor. So you're working 7 hours, you're hoping that you make a few $100 and then it spans itself beyond the points. Like when you're not sat with tables and getting tips, you're not making money, which is why servers panic and hate it when they're not getting sat or when other people are getting sat with better stuff over them, etc. So we would all be screwed if this were the case, honestly. At this point, this industry is so saturated, there's no deliverance from that. So like this is an Uber driver, 30% auto tip. To avoid this, please tip your driver. That's pretty bad. If it's just Ubering as well, like I don't feel like you as an individual should be obligated to Uber and pay tips on Uber, like Uber, Lyft, whatever. They do get paid more, and it's based on a series of variables like trip distance and stuff like that. I have talked to some Uber drivers, and the average in Dallas is what they say is they make like $16 an hour, usually, and that you have to pay your own insurance, you do have to pay your own, costs and stuff. Some people tip you a lot, some people don't tip you anything. And Uber does apparently like have some issues with their systems as of recent, which I cannot disclose because I feel like it's getting onto the line of like allegation-esque stuff, which is bad, and I don't know what I'm talking about, so don't trust me. But like in general, you shouldn't have to tip your Uber driver. Personally, I think if they're a jovial sort and kind and like, they're very fun or whatever, they let me roll down the window to get some fresh air, they do all that stuff, I'll tip. I don't care. If they're good drivers, if they don't get me in an accident. Now, a lot of the time, I've been in some crazy Ubers. Filthy Ubers, rude Uber drivers. And I bet they just deal with a bad round of stuff and then they're grumpy. And I've also dealt with like bad driving and like dangerous driving with Uber drivers. And I'll tell you, I don't want to tip after that. I'm just gonna point out I do not want to tip after that kind of thing. But then I'll meet other Uber drivers, so I treat it like it's variable. Also, what's the distance? If I'm going down the street, I'm gonna be less inclined to tip than if I'm going like to a different town or something. You know what I mean? So it's completely dependent. Although the trip pay scales, so it depends. Now again, I personally am in that mindset. Change my mind. If you are an Uber driver, tell me your perspective. What do you make without the tipping? I really want to know. Like, let's have a big pool of industry conversation on here. If you are an Uber driver or a Lyft driver, what do you make, and how big are those tips to you? Here's a new one. We went to a restaurant. Let's click this one. Here's a new one. We went to a restaurant today. It was severely understaffed. Most of the tables were empty, but they were telling people a 20-minute wait. Since they didn't have any servers, we decided to sit at the bar. The bartender didn't greet us or take drink orders or food orders. We opened the app and saw the menu. I hate that. I have to point this out. I do not like the QR code menus, the app scannage. I absolutely detest that any place. I've literally walked out of places at that point. I know it sounds like a Karen move, and maybe it is, but there are places like, one, I have an Android. My app scanning is terrible. Two, if they provide like an alternative, even if it's just a really crappy piece of paper with the stuff listed on it, I'm all good. I went to this one place and they didn't even have what we wanted. Like, their site was obviously outdated. We wanted this was in Virginia. It was in Great Falls, Virginia, outside of that in like Sterling or something. And I took my little sister to a place for beer and pretzels. And they didn't have any of the pretzels. And they didn't have, the guy was like, this is the menu. He was really rude. Like, and it wasn't that busy. It was decently busy, but not insane. And there were multiple people that were serving and multiple people bartending. And he had time to greet us, but he didn't really greet us. He just pointed to the menu and told us, here's the menu. And I was like, do you have any recommendations? Or just like, what do you have? What do you have that's just a beer? And he was like, just look at the menu. He literally just kept on going, look at the menu. And I'm like, I was pretty nice. Like, I did come in there. I sound a little brash now, but I did come in there. I was like, we don't want to like look at the menu, just get us whatever. And he was like, no, you're gonna look at the menu. And I at that point I was just like, all right, let's just leave. And then we went for Thai food instead at a good Thai place that we enjoyed. But anyways, in general, like, it sucks. I hate when they do the app, or like the apps, the online menus, the QR codes. I know I sound like a boomer, but I hate it. You could order on the app for dine-in, so we did that. I need to tell, so basically that's useless. Then you're not getting greeted by a server. You're not having any like service performed. You're performing the service yourself. You're putting in your own order. You're basically operating a POS system at that point. So I wouldn't be very inclined to tip a full 20% on like a really high bill with that. If there's no server serving me, then who am I tipping? I need to tell someone I ordered apparently. So I told the hostess, we got our food. The bartender gave us a drink. I would probably tip the bartender, maybe. I don't know. If he's being I don't know, like, what, didn't greet us or take drink orders or food orders. Oh, so you have to put your drink in with the bartender as well? The bartender gave us a drink, but we had to order the drink? We were one of two tables at a huge bar. She offered no refills of soda or any service. Today was half off pizza, normally like $30, and they have lunch specials. And I have a gift card, which is why I dealt with any of this. I paid on the app. No payment was processed. No bill was generated. The bill was $27 or like $44 if the discount wasn't included. It asked me to tip on the $44 amount. I left $6, 20% plus, for the no service dining encounter, and it told me I left 13%. Yeah, that's pretty bad. One, that's a tech issue. Two, there's no server there serving you. And if you have to go and order all your food and drink, you're basically the server. At that point, I'm not even more. I would be more inclined to tip someone at a McDonald's. At least they're taking my order for me. I pity you, fool. You shouldn't have tipped. And that's actually me being honest, because listen, I get it. Tipping's important and all that stuff. But at that point, we're getting into there's no server territory. There's no service territory. You're ordering it all through the app. You're doing it all on your own. And then you're personally left with a bartender who just hands you a drink that they're told to make by a machine, and a hostess who, unless she's also a server or something, like, I don't know how that's going to work, but wherever the server is, That's where the tips are going, unless it's like tip pooling or something. But like at the end of the day, why? Yeah, curious. Why did you tip for poor service then? And honestly, like I have to agree. Like I'm really open to tipping. I'm very willing to tip. I like to tip people for good service, but there was nobody here to tip. That's kind of the problem, my dudes. Went to buy a Harvey table, saw online for over $2,000. They're asking for a tip. Yeah, I don't know, man. That's a lot. There's just a lot. It's like tipping culture is a little out of control. Got some food at a comedy club last night, and this was on our receipt. So I don't know if they tipped or not. But Nicole sounds like a bitch because I would say not any of this. Table, booth 6, one guest. So your one guest split on a bill, or you just get some stuff or whatever. And then you're nearly bankrupt, homeless, starving. That's really rude. I don't understand why people write that on receipts. Usually the nice thing is if they leave their number for you. Don't call that number, by the way. It's always a bad idea. We'll end on this. Has this kind of service charge idea been tried before? Edit. I've had enough time now to no longer be annoyed like I was yesterday, and reading back over this, I sound enormously petty. Lol. Thinking it through more... Sorry, I'm very stupid when it comes to reading. Thinking it through more, I've concluded that no tipping isn't just a weird shaming mechanism, even if it can be used that way by some people. It does have some upsides. It does. It's a way of incentivizing good service. Agreed. On the part of the server. Yes. Sorry. It's like being in school again. I feel like I'm constantly debating with language. Since unlike a service charge, you can choose not to pay the tip if you had a bad experience. I think what motivated my stubbornness most is that I've known a lot of people over the years who have certain kind of self-righteousness with things like tip shaming. Tip shaming is so weird. I don't know if I've got an inappropriate perception of tip shaming, but I don't feel like anyone should ever be pressured to tip, and a lot of places do pressure people or force people to tip. I think a tip should be that you are not obligated to tip. Like, you should just choose to tip, and you should scale it in accordance with the establishments that you attend. Say you go to a high-end place, tip 20% or more. And if they're performing bottle service and stuff like that, you should be tipping the 20%. If you go to like a Wendy's, you shouldn't be tipping 20%. It doesn't matter. You can throw a couple bucks at them if you want, but at the end of the day, they are already getting paid a base wage. If you want to tip, say you got a really cool server, cool, tip them. But like, there's a threshold of tipping to non-tipping, and the tipping to non-tipping scale is like, we're tipping that scale in a bad direction, where everybody's now not going to be tipping at restaurants, but also like everybody's being forced to tip everywhere else. I was eating at a local restaurant by myself and was only there about 30 minutes. I paid, then the manager came to my table. At the very same minute, the restaurant hit closing time and told me I needed to leave, specifically because I didn't leave a $2 tip. Didn't even let me finish my drink. Very petty. That is actually really bad. If you are actually dining at an establishment, even if you don't tip, and say you get food and drink, you can't really be kicked out of the establishment if you're still in the process of dining. That's pretty messed up, whether you're tipping or not. And again, like, I believe in tipping, but if you don't tip, it's not like you should be forced out before you finish your drink. Now, to be fair, I've also dealt with this as a server, where your table's not leaving, it's part of your section, the people don't tip, and then they're taking up your time and your money so that you can't get resat, and all this stuff. And maybe they're not drinking or eating anything. Maybe they're just, like, done, and they're just sitting there squatting. And I've dealt with that before. I've dealt with this. I had 3 women one time sitting at a table, and they racked the bill to, like, $200. And they tipped me literally no money. No money. Not a penny. Literally nothing. And they sat there for like 3 hours. And I had a 4-table section, and I remember it was a Thursday, because I have a specific section on Thursdays usually. Now I'm not working Thursdays, apparently, at least this week. Anyways, just what I'm saying is, it sucks. And, but you're stuck with it, and it's just life. So, deal with it, I guess. But, I really wish my manager came up to people who didn't tip me when I had the bill racked, and, I wish that they'd kick them out and just be like, you took our server's money away. The $40 they could have made has been zeroed out, and they have to still pay tip out on your tab. Thank you very much. One thing they should definitely do, though, is if somebody doesn't tip at all on a bill, they should just negate that from tip out. That would ruin the lives of busters, though, so I have my sympathies. Anyways, this person I'm sorry I'm, like, ranting for no reason. I keep on, like, gallivanting around, not really finishing the things. I'm really bad. I'll just mentally rant and ramble. How tipping started. I'm curious about how tipping started because it's very sporadic. Below are some groups that you do tip and some that you don't tip. Waiters, hairdressers, taxi drivers. Don't tip. Supermarket staff, postal delivery service, refuse collectors. Any ideas? And I think this is a very reasonable perception in my personal opinion. One, delivery staff, depending on the establishment, especially on a postal scale, they're unionized and they also are set with a wage and they have a bunch of benefits and stuff. Servers, we don't get that. Waitresses, waiters, we don't have that. We pay for our own, like sometimes we have like, dental and medical and all that through our work, but we still have to pay towards it. It's not free. Other times, like me, we just skip it and we hide from all of that, and hopefully we don't get too messed up. Hopefully, we don't have to pay for that. Otherwise, we're going to be outrunning some medical bills, aren't we? But, no, but like in general, like I think that tipping started from a very simplistic view where it's like you tip your waiter at a diner or whatever, you tip your waiter at whatever establishment, or you would give like a kid like $5 for doing a good job at this thing, I think tipping probably was, or you tip your taxi driver or something like that. And I'm looking back on this like it's like 50s-esque or something like that, but I don't know when tipping actually started. I just think that was the spawn point, and now things have gotten so out of control with tipping because it's like, want to tip, you want to tip here, you want to tip there, you want to tip everywhere. Oh. I don't quite agree with everything said in the video, but here's a video that got me passionate about ending tipping. It goes a bit into the history of it as well. And there's a video here. I think this will be for the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this video, my friends. It has been absolutely lovely. I'm sorry that I was ranting and gallivanting and not actually exploring the page, but there's a lot on here, and there's always a lot to talk about. So next video, we're going to go into this video and break it down and see what we think of it, because I think it'll be very interesting. But for the time being, I hope you enjoyed yourselves. I hope I wasn't too boring or too annoying. But anyways, have a wonderful evening, my friends. I hope you enjoyed. And it has been lovely.